Hello everyone, Loremaster of Sotek here, and I have a very exciting subject to talk about today. As some of y'all may be aware, I have been closely following and keeping up with many of the publications released by Cubicle 7 for Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay 4th Edition. Now granted, I mainly do this because I play the game, and I really enjoy it. I think it's a fantastic system. I enjoy the game that I'm playing in on Sundays with some folks, and I also just, I don't know, I'd like to get back to GMing it sometime in the near future, maybe do a campaign here on the channel, but the main thing is that there's a lot of really cool lore they're writing right now. I like a lot of the systems that they're working on, and it's just great to keep up with. However, as kind of a secondary bonus, a lot of Warhammer Fantasy is kind of going through this interesting process right now where many of the different systems and pieces of lore that are kind of been scattered all over the place are starting to all fuse back together. And Cubicle 7 has kind of been the headliner of doing this. They are sort of releasing books that are taking all of these different assets and historical moments in Warhammer Fantasy and bringing them all together into a cohesive whole, which has seen the return of many characters, creatures, nations, and all sorts of other things. And of course, this does relate to Total War Warhammer, as many of the times that Total War Warhammer has kind of received a notable update, especially when they've brought back something old or something that we haven't seen before, we can actually usually find it sooner in Cubicle 7 due to their publications. And of course, this also seems to be lining up with Warhammer the Old World, which is, as we know, going through a lot of changes to update fantasy by really going back and digging through fantasy's history and bringing everything that we can into the modern era, into the modern timeline or the modern setting, which is really nice. But that kind of ties into what I wanted to discuss today, because there is a new publication that just came out that has a ton of really juicy details. And I'm going to be releasing quite a few videos discussing some various bits and pieces that I have found in their newest book, The Winds of Magic. I will say that if you have any interest in Warhammer Fantasy literature or role-playing games, I would really recommend picking up these books. Even if you're someone that, I've met people that like to play Warhammer Fantasy themed roleplay games, but they're just really attached to like the D&D systems and stuff like that. I still recommend picking up these books if you're into that, because they just provide you with so much great information. Though I do think this system is better than D&D, sue me. I don't know. I've been playing both for a while. I much prefer Cubicle 7 system. But in any event, today we're going to be talking about the Fimir, because something that I've been waiting for so long that was kind of hinted at, I think about a month or 2 months ago, has been finally revealed in this book, which is that the guys at Cubicle 7 have been working on creating the first playable Fimir Matriarch, which is something that we have been waiting a super long time to see. And I've just been eagerly waiting for this book to come out, and it's finally out. So while we have like pictures and footage from Warhammer 2 and stuff, all this Fimir stuff going on in the background, I want to talk about why this is a big deal and what it is they've done. So if you've shown up on my streams where I've talked during the times I've talked about Fimir, or you've been around any of the times I've spoken about the future of Norsca, one of my biggest hopes for Norsca is that while I do really enjoy the human aspect of Norsca, and I do think there's still some interesting places we can explore with that, my biggest focus and the thing that I think they should prioritize right now is actually the Fimir side of the roster. Because the Fimir that we have in Total War Warhammer 2, while they are a decent chunk of the Norscan roster, they could actually step up to be a more substantial chunk of the roster, because the Fimir are a full civilization. They're not just a group of creatures that can be found in the north. They're not just entities or monsters that can be stumbled upon, making up the armies of chaos. They are a full civilization in and of themselves. They are not just defined by their relationship to chaos. They are a very ancient civilization, one of the original civilizations from what we can tell. They predate the old ones, and they unfortunately were considered undesirable or unwanted as part of the Great Plan, so they were one of those races that were slotted for extermination by the old ones. However, due to their ability to, they're very, very good at hiding, especially when it comes to hiding in mires and the cold swamps that you can find typically along the northern parts of the world, and they seem to have managed to escape notice, at least to avoid eradication, because they're very good at obfuscating their territory. But they build these great towers and these really creepy, dark architecture structures that can be found in these dark, cold swamps, and then they use magical fog to hide themselves, where they use the bog to their advantage, these marshlands. And as you know, when the old ones were killed and the chaos gods showed up on the scene, the Fimir were one of the first races to really bind themselves to the dark gods. They weren't the first, but they were definitely in the early running. But kind of like the dragon ogres, they didn't really get the best deal. And they also made the mistake the dragon ogres did, which both of them kind of offered their souls to the dark gods of like their civilization. They made these giant binding pacts. But because of that, they really didn't have anything left to bargain with, and the dark gods grew bored with them and stopped showering them with gifts. You know, they got some power, and then after that, they kind of just faded into obscurity. And, you know, they're these amazingly long-lived and powerful entities, but ultimately, you know, the chaos gods were far more interested in their amusing themselves with humanity's antics, who are much better at reproducing at a very large rate, and also it's much more of like an individual basis when it comes to making a pact with them. But anyway, so we have the Fimir. They're very spooky creatures. They come out of the fog and attack people out of nowhere, and we have a very select amount of them already in Total War Warhammer 2, and like very notable, which is that we have the warrior caste, and then we have the sorcerer caste, which are the heroes, of course, the Fimir Bale Fiends. But so these Fimir are set up in clans. I'm gonna open this book here because we got a little bit more insight into the Fimir culture when Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay kind of came out with their main core book. And one of the things it tells us is, it says, the Fimir are a secretive, one-eyed reptilian race that stalk the darkest recesses of the dank swamps and boglands. They shun sunlight, usually only appearing at dawn or dusk or under the cover of mist and fog to spirit away victims for mysterious, loathsome purposes. Generally speaking, it's sacrifice, especially to the dark gods. Human witches, reckless or desperate enough to meddle in the affairs of demons, have been known to seek out the Fimir to learn their malign mysteries, for it is said they summon and control such entities. The Fimir do seem to kind of specialize in demon summoning, though one thing that we've gotten a little bit more insight into is that they tend not to want to rely terribly heavy on that, but, you know, whether the greater risk lies in trafficking with the ruinous powers or trading with the Fimir is anyone's guess. The Fimir have a matriarchal society. The leader of each clan is a powerful witch called a Maerg, and she's aided by a cadre of lesser spellcasters called the Dairak. The majority of the clan members are lowly Shurls, who are protected by the warrior caste, the Fim, who have bony spikes and knobs on their tails used to break bones of unweary opponents. So, what we have in Total War Warhammer right now is that we have the Fim, which are the basic warrior caste, who you're all familiar with their really big bony tails and their ability to absolutely just mess people up with their huge, super badass weapons. And then we also have the Dairak, and the Dairak are, of course, the Bale Fiends, which are the hero level. Now, this book talks about that they are a matriarchal society and that the leaders are known as the Maergs. And we've never actually gotten to see one, at least not in a really, really long time. And that has officially changed. Because not only do we have a Maerg, we have a legendary Lord Maerg. And when I say legendary lord, I mean that we have a truly ancient named entity, a character with a history and a backstory and personality, and who allows us to really get to know an individual Fimir. And that is the new character revealed in this book. And just to kind of give you an idea of how powerful this lady is, this creature, is that she is introduced and on par with the Blue Scribes, who will very likely be a Tzeentch legendary lord for the Demons of Chaos, which are these two blue horrors that fly around on a big disc of Tzeentch. And then Egrim von Horseman, the very, very infamous Chaos Lord of Tzeentch, who is one of Tzeentch's most powerful mortal champions, who rides on the big Chaos Dragon Baldros. So who is this character? Well, her name is Mòna Mimn, and I think I pronounced that correctly. There's this particular way that they notate how the O is supposed to be pronounced, and I've never seen it before, and I've tried Googling it, and it's like a pain in the ass to find anything. So whatever, but I'm just gonna call her Mòna Mimn for the sake of this, and that ends up being an incorrect pronunciation. That wouldn't be the first time, so sue me. So Mòna Mimn is a Fimir Matriarch who is the last of her clan. She's in the ballpark or a little over 1,000 years old, and she is the last of her particular group. The last of her Dirac died centuries ago, and she did not have a female born into her clan who she was able to pass down her knowledge to. And since they all died out due to humans attacking them and just, the ravages of time, she's just completely alone. So she lives in this massive leaning black tower. That's all that's left. That's kind of sinking into the mud, and all the huts and the buildings that were part of their civilization have rotted away or sinking into the bog. And so Mòna Mimn now just wanders around, accompanied only by her fen beasts, which fen beasts are a creature that you're probably familiar with if you're familiar with Warhammer Fantasy. But a fen beast is basically a magical construct created out of swamp matter. They are very, very famous and well known if you're into Albion lore, because the Truthsayers and Dark Emissaries of Albion are kind of where the lore originally comes from for fen beasts. They are like the masters of summoning lots of fen beasts to serve them as big stompy monsters and also as guardians. But she, of course, knows this magic, which makes sense that Fimir would know this, and she constantly has fen beasts following her around that kind of act as her only companions now. And she just kind of wanders around. It notes that she has the ability to dominate demons and to summon demons, but she doesn't like demons very much, because the thing that irritates her about demons is that they're poor company. They always want something. They're not willing to just be good companions. They have desires, and they're tricksy little bastards. So what is Mòna Mimn's deal? Well, on top of being a very, very powerful wizard and a terrifying combatant due to the fact that she's a big monstrous creature, Mòna Mimn seeks to expand the swamps. So she wants to turn the entirety of the old world into a cold mirror. So just this immense, damp, cold swamp marshland that is pretty much it's just misery. So the thing is, she's powerful enough to do this because Mòna Mimn has actually discovered a way to screw with the ancient waystones of the elves slash dwarves slash old ones. Because we've talked about this in the past, but there's like this ancient waystone network all over the planet that was kind of built on top of the original designs created by the old ones, which is now what we know now as the geomantic web. The ancient waystones were built on top of that, and they serve as this functioning system to draw all the winds of magic as it comes out of the north through all these complex systems that eventually leads them to Ulthuan, where they are then sucked up into the vortex and shot back into the ether, so that magic is not able to just build up in the world. But Mòna Mimn has discovered one of these ancient waystones in her territory, and she has the ability to manipulate it and is doing so to start expanding the cold mirror. so that it will devour the entirety of the empire, nay, the entirety of the old world, so that everyone can experience the loneliness and suffering of her realm, so she could just unleash her hatred on everyone, which is a pretty interesting goal. One of the things I actually really like about Mòna Mimn, and one of the reasons that I think she would really fit very, very nicely as kind of one of the big legendary lords for Norsca, and this is something we've kind of spoken about that doesn't necessarily come across very well in the games, but the legendary lords of Norsca and Norsca itself are very distinct from the Warriors of Chaos when you get into the nitty-gritty of the lore and their design, because ultimately they're not the same level of evil as the Warriors of Chaos. When you're dealing with the Warriors of Chaos, there's really nothing redeeming about them. These are individuals who have completely and utterly sold their souls to the dark powers. They are beyond redemption in the vast majority of cases, and they are these cruel, borderline immortal entities that unleash horrible carnage and slaughter and suffering and death in the name of their dark masters, usually in pursuit of true immortality in the form of demonhood, or, you know, just because they're having a good time. But the Norsca side of things tends to be a bit different. The people of Norsca don't tend to be as comically evil as the Warriors of Chaos. You know, their understanding of the dark gods is much more there's kind of this layer of separation where they don't understand the true nature of the dark gods generally. That, you know, they see them through these animal totems, or they worship them as these gods who in reality are the dark gods, but they're only worshiping on like an aspect of them. Many Norscans are into ancestor worship, and many of them are kind of forced into this lifestyle. They are forced to do many of these horrible things because it's the only way to survive in their environment. Whereas and many of the characters who lead them are not individuals that generally are, you know, they're not out there to destroy the world. They're usually just kind of suffering in some way. They're, I don't want to say they're relatable, because that's definitely probably not the best terminology, but they're sort of relatable. And many of them, while selfish, they ultimately are not, you know, trying to cast down empires. You know, you have Wulfric, who was a mighty warrior, but is someone that was stupid enough to essentially challenge the gods. Granted, he was drunk, and I don't think he was thinking very carefully due to how drunk he was about the consequences of his actions. But he, you know, he basically just boasted that I'm the greatest warrior and I have no equal. And the Chaos Gods were like, okay, bet. And they cursed him. So he's honestly like struck with this awful curse that makes him never able to rest, constantly wandering around fighting worthy competitors. I mean, he does worship the dark gods, but, you know, he's also been dealt a really shit hand by them. And if you read his novel, which is just called Wulfric, it does a really good job at demonstrating this, that while Wulfric, I wouldn't call him a good guy, he's definitely not like Archaon. You know, he's not out there to burn reality to the ground. He's just trying to get rid of his curse and be able to like free himself so he could live like a normal life. And he goes through a lot of horrible suffering. The same thing with Throg. Throg may kind of come off as a stupid brute, and I will say that Throg, his interpretation in Total War Warhammer is probably my absolutely least favorite of all of the characters that we have. And it is a damn shame, because Throg is very particularly well characterized in the various army books he's appeared in, and he also shows up to prominently feature in the end times in the Gotrek and Felix novel called Kinslayer. But Throg, the Troll King, is not this big stupid brute. Like, he is a troll, so he does have troll-like desires. You know, he is hungry a lot of the time, and he does need to eat quite a bit. But Throg is intelligent, and that's kind of a curse. It's something that he discovers as a curse more than a blessing, is that Throg is the only one of his species that is intelligent. You know, his intelligence being vaguely equivalent to that of a human, and though he's smarter than a good deal of humans. And the thing about Throg is his story is ultimately very sad and depressing, because in the end times you find out there's this storyline of he has all of his agents running around Kislev and the Empire kidnapping wizards and bringing them to his tower. He doesn't even care what race they are. Like, he even has like a Grey Seer kidnapped, or he manages to get his hands on like a Grey Seer and a bunch of other different kinds of wizards. And ultimately, his goal, his entire goal, when he takes over the city of Prague after it is destroyed by the forces of chaos. He kind of claims the ruins, and he makes this big monstrous army. And you're sitting there going, "Oh, what's he gonna do? Like, is he trying to bring about it? You know, this ice age of his? Is he trying to bring about the age of monsters?" Not really. During the end times, he gets it in his head that maybe the best thing would be he doesn't want to be alone. So he ultimately has all of these wizards struggling to create an intelligent troll. He wants to make other intelligent trolls. Now, he's not doing this purely because he doesn't want to be alone. He also recognizes how powerful he is, and Throg's not stupid. He realizes that if he can get an army of intelligent trolls, he would literally be unstoppable. There would be nothing in the world that could stop an army of clever trolls. It's just not happening. So that's ultimately his ambition. He's still evil, yeah, he's still selfish, but it's a very distinct form of evil that I think actually matches him very, very nicely to Norsca, where you have these it's kind of a legion of entities that are not like truly world destroyers. They're more just selfish entities and selfish creatures who have been dealt bad hands, usually by things out of their control, though not always. And I think Mòna Mimn actually fits this idea very, very nicely, in that we're dealing with this Fimir Matriarch, who is an incredibly powerful sorceress and is, you know, extremely dangerous in close combat. But ultimately, like, her thing is that she's lonely. She is just miserable because all of her people have died out, and humans are responsible for that. Humans are the ones that have wiped out her clan over all the decades, and especially these so-called civilized humans. And so she has settled on this idea of being able to expand the cold mirror that she lives in, because she knows it is not suitable for these humans. It would result in the death of their crops. It would bring freezing rains, and it would make everyone suffer the way she has suffered. So once again, this is an evil entity. This is a dark and terrible character, but she's complex, and she has some interesting things going for her. I'll make sure that we have pictures coming up of her design, because she does have a great design. But so we have this, you know, this towering monstrous entity. She's not colossal, but she's notably a bit bigger than your typical Fimir. You know, she would definitely be quite a bit larger than them, though she is certainly more dangerous than any other Fimir when it comes to, like, even without her magic, she is a lot. And with her magic, she gets super scary. But the main thing that she brings to the table, on top of being a really big scary fighter, is that if we could get her as a legendary lord for the game, and she came with just a smidge of new content. I mean, honestly, just sitting here, I think about if we got Mòna Mimn as a new legendary lord for Norsca, that would finally give us a Norscan legendary lord who is not in Norsca, which is kind of like the biggest problem, I think, with Throg and Wulfric, is that they're both very close to each other. So no matter which one you play, you don't really get a different experience. They're really, like, they have slightly different starting enemies, but other than that, you know, it's basically the same. If you give us Mòna Mimn, now we have a character who could appear anywhere. You know, you could put her, in her story, she's near Reichland. She's in these swamps down to the south of the Empire. So we could have a Norscan character who appears somewhere deep in the Empire, or you could really have her show up anywhere. Maybe she could show up on Albion. But you know, we have this character who is able to appear in a very, very different place, which is super nice. And this gives us a wizard monster legendary lord for Norsca. So we have another monstrous legendary lord, so it's not just Throg, and she's also the first wizard that they would have, which is great because I think every single race should have at least a wizard and a fighter legendary lord. And then from there, you know, you want to try and split things up, or you're like, okay, let's try and get a monster in here, or a monstrous mount riding character if we can. Maybe try and get like a shooty focus character if it makes sense for that faction. You know, you want different kind of roles. So if we bring her in as the Fimir legendary lord, so she has all these different buffs and synergies for Fimir. She has all these different, maybe she could have like a major focus on magic and sorcery. She offers a lot of bonuses to Fimir Balefiends. And the big thing is she could also come with a new lore of magic, which is that Mòna Mimn actually has her own unique form of magic that you can use for all of the Fimir Mirgs if you're playing in the RPG, but would do very nicely for a new lore of magic that could be exclusive to her, or it could be for her and we also get a Fimir Balefiend, which is marsh magic. And marsh magic is pretty nasty. It has some kind of nasty abilities. She's able to like summon swarms of biting insects to like start eating people alive, and also obviously it's very, very distracting and painful. She's able to cause the ground to just turn into this horrible thick sucking mud, so people are getting slowed down and they won't be able to defend themselves or fight as efficiently because they're just like being eaten, or you know, they're just being sucked into this cold mud. She's able to bring forth like these freezing rains that cause people to grow like immensely tired. So, you know, I'm looking at this like, so a bite of midges, you could have this AoE spell that maybe it does damage over time as the insects are like biting and eating people, and maybe it also like lowers melee attack as, you know, they're trying to fight off the insects. You have Despondent Slough, which is Despondent Sloth, I think is what it actually is, which is the mud spell. So, you know, she could pick a unit and their speed and charge bonus heavily drops as they're like being sucked into the mud. You have Inculcate Mizzle, which is that she summons these clouds and this fog, and it's just freezing rain. So it could cause, I would imagine this would cause like major penalties to leadership. Maybe it could also cause penalties for to melee attack and accuracy or reload rate, as you know, units are being frozen, or you know, they're being soaked with this horrible rain. She has Mystic Mist, which she is a spell that functions very similar to Mystifying Miasma, so it could be a very similar spell, or maybe it could even be a buff spell that increases missile resistance for friendly units. She has Omir Be More, which is allow her to expand the swamp, so maybe that could be like a larger spell she has when interpreted into a combat scenario. And then she also has Turned Around, which is a spell that really messes with units like sense of direction and makes them very mentally confused and all this stuff. But it's like, hey, that's 6 spells. Some of them you might have to finagle a little bit, but that's like a fun little lore of magic right there. And then with her, you know, we could get Fenbeast. So maybe they could bring Fenbeast into the game, and you know, maybe honestly a lot of factions could have access to Fenbeast. Fenbeasts are like one of the most neutral groups in all of fantasy, because pretty much anyone that has anything to do with swamps can have access to them. But if, you know, even if they don't end up giving us Fenbeast for Norsca, because like, let's say they do a Dogs of War thing, right? And we get like some Albion stuff, so we get Fenbeast as like a mercenary unit, or maybe they're part of the Dogs of War army. Then what we could have is that Mòna is just able to summon Fenbeast as a bound spell. You know, so they're not really a part of the roster, but she gets to summon one for free, or summon a unit of them, depending on how they would work. And then with her, we would get a new lord. You know, if we got a new generic lord, we could get a Fimir Noble, which a Fimir Noble is just a really heavily armored, big, badass Fimir that's super amazing at fighting. And I think the Fimir Lord would be such a good generic lord for Norsca, because it would finally give us a monster character for Norsca, which is something they should have had ages ago. They should have had it at release, to be frank. Because having only one lord type in an army is just, it's so bad. But yeah, I just wanted to kind of draw attention to the Fimir Matriarch special character created. So now she is an official Games Workshop character. She is a part of the system. And it doesn't have to be Mòna Mimn. You know, it could be like a CA original, or maybe Games Workshop could do something. But it's like the character exists, and I think that she would do well for being this, you know, human-hating entity who relies much more on the monstrous side of things, but, you know, is willing to use and manipulate the Norskans that are sent to her by the Dark Powers. You know, she doesn't really like to work with demons, so her working with Norsca, I think, would make a lot more sense. And I think she would just make for a really cool Legendary Lord. And it could just come with a lot of fun stuff. Like if you did a very, very minor update where you're like, okay, we're not going to bring in any new units or anything, we're just going to drop like the bare minimum to get this up and running. I think just getting Mòna with the as a Legendary Lord, and then get the Fimir Noble as a generic Lord, I think those two alone would open up so much for Norsca. I mean, that's not the only thing I want for Norsca. You know, I definitely want us to get some kind of shaman sorcerer Legendary Lord who's like a human wizard. That way we could get shaman sorcerer lords as a generic caster. That way we have generic wizard lords for Norsca. We also need things like the cursed Ettins. The cursed Ettin would be like a really great new monster for Norsca, among some other things. But maybe with Mòna Mimn we could finally get those armored chaos trolls that the Warriors of Chaos have. That way Norsca has at least 3 kinds of trolls instead of just 2. Though I also think bile trolls should be with Norsca. Like, I think they could be available to Nurgle as well, but I think bile trolls would fit so nicely, because Throg needs more than 2 kinds of trolls. He needs like 3 or 4 different kinds of trolls. You know, give us like armored chaos trolls, bile trolls, chaos trolls, Norscan trolls. Boom, done. Anyway, that's gonna be it. I've ended up talking way longer than I meant to on this, but I just wanted to draw attention to this. We'll be talking more about some other stuff in this book, as well as some other, you know, we've got a Festus video coming up soon as well. So thank you all for watching, and I'll see you next time. Bye-bye.